They said Damien Blackwell's heart was as frozen as the empire he built. But Olivia knew the truth. Once, that heart had belonged to her. The elevator climbed toward the 42nd floor with the mechanical precision that defined everything about Blackwell Industries. Olivia Parker pressed her trembling fingers against her leather portfolio, trying to steady the storm of nerves that had been building since she'd accepted this position. Senior Marketing Director, 6-figure salary, corner office overlooking Manhattan. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like walking into the heart of winter itself. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a world of glass and steel that stretched toward floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything was sharp angles and cold surfaces, designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure. Employees moved through the space with the quiet efficiency of people who understood that mistakes were not tolerated here. Ms. Parker, a perfectly manicured assistant, approached, her smile professional but warm. "I'm Jennifer, Mr. Blackwell's executive assistant. He's waiting for you in his office." Olivia's heart stuttered at the name she'd been trying to avoid thinking about for the past week. When the headhunter had contacted her about this position, she'd researched the company thoroughly, read every article about Blackwell Industries' meteoric rise to dominance in the tech sector. But somehow, she'd managed to avoid looking too closely at the CEO's photo, telling herself it couldn't possibly be him. The hallway to the executive suite felt endless, each step echoing against marble floors that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Jennifer knocked twice on massive oak doors before pushing them open. "Sir, Ms. Parker is here for her orientation meeting." "Send her in." The voice hit Olivia like a physical blow, deeper than she remembered, roughened by years and success, but unmistakably his. She stepped into the office, her professional smile faltering as she took in the man behind the executive desk. Damien Blackwell had always been handsome, even at 19 when she'd known him as Danny, the scholarship student who wrote her poetry between economics classes. But success had carved him into something harder, more magnificent and more intimidating. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His charcoal suit fit like it had been crafted specifically for his broad shoulders. And his gray eyes held the kind of cold calculation that made grown investors nervous. Those eyes met hers across 20 feet of polished floor, and for a moment, time collapsed. She was 20 again, sitting in the campus coffee shop, watching him laugh at something she'd said, his whole face lighting up with joy that seemed too big for his lean frame. Then his expression shuddered, becoming as impersonal as a business contract. "Ms. Parker." He stood, extending a hand across his desk. "Welcome to Blackwell Industries." His handshake was brief, professional, and completely devoid of recognition. Olivia stared into those familiar gray eyes and saw nothing but polite indifference, as if she were just another employee in his vast corporate empire. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell." Her voice sounded steady, which felt like a small miracle. "I'm excited about the opportunity to contribute to the company's continued success. Jennifer has prepared your orientation materials and access badges. Your department head will brief you on current projects." Damien returned to his seat, already reaching for a file on his desk. "I expect nothing less than excellence from my senior staff. I trust you understand what that means." The dismissal was clear, but Olivia found herself frozen in place, searching his face for some flicker of the boy who had once promised her forever. He looked up from his papers, one eyebrow raised in polite inquiry. "Was there something else, Ms. Parker?" The formal distance in his voice cut deeper than any blade. This was the same man who had once driven 3 hours just to surprise her on her birthday, who had held her while she cried over her father's diagnosis, who had whispered promises against her hair in the darkness of his tiny dorm room. "No," she managed. "Nothing else." As she turned to leave, Olivia caught her reflection in the massive windows that overlooked the city. She looked professional, composed, successful, everything she'd worked to become in the years since college. But inside, she felt like the 20-year-old girl who had waited by her phone for 3 days after graduation, hoping he would call to explain why he'd disappeared, without a word. The door closed behind her, with a soft click that sounded remarkably like the end of a chapter she'd thought was already finished. Jennifer was waiting with a warm smile and a manila folder full of corporate policies and building access information. Your office is just down the hall. I know this can be overwhelming on the first day, but everyone here is very supportive. Thank you. Olivia accepted the folder, her hands still trembling slightly. Can I ask you something? Mr. Blackwell, has he always been so intense? Jennifer's smile became understanding. He's demanding but fair, and he's built this company from nothing into what it is today. That kind of success requires a certain focus. Focus. That was one word for it. Olivia nodded and followed Jennifer down the hallway, trying to process the reality of working for the man who had once been her entire world. Her office was beautiful, spacious, well lit, with a view that cost millions in Manhattan real estate. The nameplate on her desk read, Olivia Parker, Senior Marketing Director, in crisp professional lettering. She should have felt proud, accomplished, ready to take on the challenges of her new position. Instead, she stood at her window, looking out at the city below, and wondered if accepting this job had been the biggest mistake of her life. As Olivia settled into her new office, trying to make sense of Damien's complete lack of recognition, she noticed something that made her blood freeze. On her desk, partially hidden beneath the welcome materials Jennifer had provided, was a single white envelope with her name written in handwriting she would have recognized anywhere. Inside, in Damien's familiar script, were just 4 words. We need to talk. Why had the boy who once wrote her love letters now looked at her as if she were the enemy? The first week at Blackwell Industries passed in a blur of meetings, project briefings, and the careful navigation of corporate politics. Olivia threw herself into her work with the desperate focus of someone trying to outrun their own thoughts. The marketing department was brilliant, innovative, and surprisingly welcoming, a stark contrast to the frozen reception she'd received from the CEO. Damien treated her exactly as he would any other senior executive, with professional courtesy, strategic distance, and the kind of calculated precision that made it impossible to find fault with his management style. He was never cruel, never inappropriate, never anything but perfectly, devastatingly professional, which somehow made it worse. During department meetings, he addressed her as Ms. Parker with the same tone he used for everyone else. When she presented campaign strategies, he listened with the focused attention he gave all business matters, asking pointed questions that showed he'd absorbed every detail. He never looked at her longer than necessary, never allowed personal recognition to flicker across his features, never gave any indication that she was anything more than another cog in his corporate machine. But Olivia had loved him once, and that kind of intimacy left marks that couldn't be erased by time or distance or expensive suits. She noticed things others missed. The way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly when she spoke, the brief hesitation before he said her name, the careful way he positioned himself in meetings to avoid direct eye contact. Most telling of all, she noticed that he had stopped wearing his watch on his left wrist. It was a small thing, probably meaningless to anyone else. But Olivia remembered the vintage Omega his grandfather had given him for graduation. How proud he'd been to wear it, how carefully he'd wound it every morning. He'd worn it on his left wrist for as long as she'd known him, a habit so ingrained it was unconscious. Now it graced his right wrist, and Olivia couldn't help but wonder if the change had anything to do with the thin white scar she glimpsed there during one particular meeting, a mark that looked suspiciously like it came from the promise ring she'd once worn on a chain around her neck. The envelope with her name remained in her desk drawer, unopened. Every day she told herself she would read it, and every day she found excuses to avoid the confrontation it surely contained. The 4 words had been written in the same handwriting that once filled love letters and grocery lists and little notes tucked into her textbooks. But the Damien who wrote those gentle words seemed as distant as a fairy tale. "You're working late again." The voice startled her out of her concentration. Olivia looked up from her laptop to find Marcus Webb, the VP of Sales, standing in her office doorway with 2 cups of coffee and a concerned expression. Just catching up on the Morrison account analysis. She accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "Thank you. This is exactly what I needed." Marcus settled into the chair across from her desk, his easy smile a welcome contrast to the tension that seemed to follow her everywhere lately. He was attractive in an uncomplicated way. Brown hair, kind eyes, the sort of steady charm that made him popular with clients and colleagues alike. You know, there's this crazy concept called work-life balance. I hear it's all the rage among successful professionals. Olivia laughed, feeling some of the knots in her shoulders loosen. I'll look into it once I get settled. Everything's still so new. How are you finding the adjustment? Blackwell can be intense for newcomers. Mr. Blackwell certainly maintains high standards. Olivia kept her voice carefully neutral, but something in her expression must have given her away. Marcus's smile became more knowing. Ah, you've experienced the full force of the Blackwell focus. He has that effect on people, makes them want to prove themselves worthy of his empire. Is that what I'm doing? Maybe, or maybe, you're just trying to figure out how someone so young built something this impressive while maintaining the emotional temperature of an Arctic winter. The description was so accurate it made Olivia wince. You think he's always been like that? Who knows? Success changes people. Power definitely changes people. Maybe he started warm and life froze him into what he needed to become. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. Speaking of warmth, there's a great little bistro a few blocks from here. They have excellent wine and even better conversation. Are you free for dinner tomorrow? Olivia felt a flutter of panic that had nothing to do with Marcus's invitation. He was attractive, successful, clearly interested, and exactly the kind of uncomplicated relationship she should want. But the thought of dinner, of intimate conversation, of moving forward with someone new while her past sat 40 floors above her, felt impossible. That's very kind, but I'm still getting settled. Rain check. Then. Marcus's smile was understanding rather than disappointed. The offer stands whenever you're ready. After he left, Olivia stared out her window at the city lights, thinking about the strange trajectory that had brought her back into Damien's orbit. She'd built a good life in Chicago. Successful career, close friends, even a few relationships that had shown promise before fading into friendly indifference. She'd convinced herself she was over the heartbreak that had defined her early 20s. Then the headhunter had called with an opportunity too good to refuse, and here she was, working for the man who had once been her whole world, pretending they were strangers. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and her heart jumped before she realized it couldn't be from Damien. He barely acknowledged her existence during business hours. He certainly wouldn't be texting her after 9 p.m. The message was from her best friend Emma. How's the new job? Are you conquering Manhattan yet? Olivia stared at the screen, trying to figure out how to explain that Manhattan might be conquering her instead. Finally, she typed back, "It's complicated. I'll call you this weekend." As she gathered her things to leave, Olivia's eyes fell on her desk drawer, where Damien's note waited like an unexplored landmine. 4 words that might explain everything or destroy what little peace she'd managed to build. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow she would read it and finally understand why the boy who had once loved her completely now looked at her as if she were a stranger. The next morning, Olivia arrived early to find her office door slightly ajar, something she was certain she'd locked the night before. Inside, her computer was exactly as she'd left it, her papers undisturbed, everything perfectly normal except for one detail that made her breath catch in her throat. The envelope in her desk drawer was gone, and in its place was a single white rose with a note attached. Some conversations can't wait forever. But what if his coldness wasn't indifference? But protection? The Blackwell Industries annual charity gala was the kind of event that graced the society pages and attracted Manhattan's elite like moths to extremely expensive flames. Olivia stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, watching couples glide across the dance floor while crystal chandeliers cast rainbows through the air, and tried to convince herself she wasn't scanning the crowd for one particular figure. She'd almost declined to attend. The invitation had arrived with her name elegantly calligraphed on cream-colored cardstock, along with a brief note from Jennifer explaining that senior staff were expected to make an appearance. It was a professional obligation, nothing more, but as Olivia adjusted the flowing skirt of her midnight blue gown, a dress she'd bought specifically because it made her feel confident and beautiful, she couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would change. Everything. You look stunning. Marcus appeared at her elbow, resplendent in his tuxedo and carrying 2 glasses of champagne. I wasn't sure you'd come. Neither was I, honestly. Olivia accepted the champagne, grateful for something to do with her hands. But I suppose it's important to show support for the company's charitable initiatives. Spoken like a true corporate executive. Marcus's eyes crinkled with amusement. Though I suspect you actually care about the causes we're supporting tonight. Literacy programs for underprivileged children, scholarship funds for first-generation college students. Right up your alley. He was right, of course. The Foundation's mission statement had moved her to tears when she'd researched it. Damien might have built his empire with calculated precision, but his philanthropic efforts revealed a heart she'd once known, intimately, one that understood what it meant to need. Opportunities others took for granted, ladies and gentlemen, a smooth voice announced over the ballroom's sound system. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Blackwell Industries, Mr. Damien Blackwell. Olivia's breath caught as applause filled the air and the crowd turned toward the main stage. Damien stood behind the podium looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine, his black tuxedo perfectly tailored, his dark hair gleaming under the lights, his presence commanding the attention of every person in the room. But it was his eyes that undid her. Even from across the ballroom, even after 8 years of separation, she could read the emotions he thought he'd hidden so well. He was scanning the crowd with the same intensity he brought to board meetings, and when his gaze found hers, time stopped. For one crystalline moment, Damien's carefully constructed mask slipped. His speech faltered mid-sentence, and Olivia saw everything he'd been hiding. Recognition, longing, pain, and something that looked devastatingly like hope. Then the moment passed, and he was speaking again about corporate responsibility and giving back to the community, his voice steady and commanding. But Olivia barely heard the words. She was lost in memory, transported back to a different gala 8 years ago. The spring formal at their university had been nothing like this opulent affair, just a decorated gymnasium and a local DJ. But to 2 kids who could barely afford the tickets, it had felt like magic. Damien had saved for months to rent a tuxedo, and Olivia had worn a dress from a consignment shop that she'd altered herself. They'd danced badly, and laughed constantly, and made plans for a future that seemed as bright and infinite as the stars. After the dance, they'd walked back to his dorm room hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. Damien had been accepted to Harvard Business School with a full scholarship, while Olivia had landed an internship with a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago. The summer stretched ahead of them like a bridge between their college years and the adult lives they were so eager to begin. "We'll make it work," Damien had promised, holding her close in the narrow confines of his dorm room. "Distance doesn't matter when you love someone as much as I love you." "What if you meet someone else?" Olivia had whispered against his chest, voicing the fear that kept her awake at night. "What if Harvard changes you?" "Never." His voice had been fierce with certainty. "You're it for me, Liv. You're my forever." They'd held each other that night with the desperate tenderness of 2 people trying to memorize each other, as if somehow they'd known it might be their last time together. 3 days later, Damien had discovered the letter. The memory hit Olivia like a physical blow, so vivid she could almost smell the cheap cologne he'd worn in college and feel the texture of his threadbare sheets. She'd never told him the truth about that letter, had been too hurt by his immediate assumption that she'd betrayed him to fight for their relationship. Pride had kept them apart then. Pride and youth and the terrible certainty that came with being 20 years old and thinking you understood how the world worked. "Are you all right?" Marcus's concerned voice broke through her reverie. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that." Olivia forced a smile, trying to ground herself in the present. Just lost in thought. The speech had ended while she was trapped in memory, and now the music had resumed. Couples were returning to the dance floor, the evening's program continuing around her while she stood frozen in time. "Dance with me," Marcus said gently, extending his hand. Sometimes moving helps when thinking becomes too much. Olivia allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor, grateful for his steady presence and uncomplicated kindness. Marcus was a good man, she reminded herself. He was everything she should want, available, interested, emotionally mature enough not to carry around 8-year-old baggage. But as they swayed to the music, Olivia found herself searching the crowd over Marcus's shoulder, looking for the one person she couldn't seem to stop thinking about, despite every rational reason to do so. She found him standing near the bar, surrounded by board members and investors, playing the role of gracious host with the skill of someone who'd mastered the art of public facades. But even as he smiled and nodded at whatever story someone was telling, his gaze kept drifting across the ballroom to where she danced with Marcus. Their eyes met again, and this time Damien didn't look away. There was something raw in his expression, something that spoke of sleepless nights and regrets that grew heavier with each passing year. Olivia felt her chest tighten with an emotion she'd thought she'd buried long ago. The song ended, but neither she nor Damien moved. They stood frozen across the crowded ballroom, separated by distance and time and all the words they'd never said to each other, connected by invisible threads that 8 years hadn't been able to break. "I should probably mingle with some of the other board members," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. He'd noticed the direction of her attention, but he was too much of a gentleman to comment on it directly. "Rain check on that second dance?" "Of course," Olivia murmured, though she wasn't sure she'd heard him correctly. Her attention was entirely focused on the man who was now walking toward her, with purpose in his stride. Damien crossed the ballroom like a man walking toward his destiny, his eyes never leaving Olivia's face. When he was close enough to touch, he stopped and extended his hand with the same formal courtesy he'd shown her all week, except for the slight tremor in his fingers that betrayed him. "Miss Parker," he said, his voice barely audible over the music. "Would you honor me with a dance?" As Olivia stared at the hand that had once promised her forever, she realized this was the moment she'd been both dreading and longing for since the day she'd walked into his office. But if the truth stayed buried, would they be buried with it? The dance floor seemed to part around them as Damien led Olivia into the circle of his arms. His touch was light, professional, but she could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a flame. They moved together with the unconscious synchronization of two people who had once known each other's bodies as well as their own minds, even though 8 years had passed since they'd been this close. "You look beautiful tonight," Damien said quietly. His voice pitched low enough that only she could hear it over the music. "Thank you." Olivia kept her eyes fixed on his shoulder, afraid of what she might see in his face if she looked directly at him. "It's a lovely event. The foundation does important work." "It does." There was something in his tone that made her glance up, and she caught a glimpse of the passion that had always driven him, the fierce desire to make the world better for people who started with nothing. "Education changed my life. I want to make sure other kids have the same opportunities. You always said you'd change the world." The words slipped out before Olivia could stop them, carrying the weight of shared history. Damien's step faltered slightly, and his grip on her hand tightened. "Did I? I don't remember being quite so idealistic." "You were." Olivia found herself looking at him now, searching his face for traces of the boy who had mapped out his dreams on napkins in the campus coffee shop. "You were going to revolutionize business education, make Harvard Business School more accessible to students from working-class backgrounds, write books that would democratize financial literacy." Ambitious goals for someone who could barely afford textbooks. The best goals usually are. They danced in silence for several measures, the music washing over them while memories built walls and bridges in equal measure. Olivia was acutely aware of every point where their bodies connected. His hand at her waist, her palm against his shoulder, the careful space he maintained between them that somehow felt more intimate than touching. "Why did you take this job, Olivia?" The use of her first name sent a shock through her system. He'd been so careful to maintain professional distance, to treat her like any other employee. But here, in the anonymous crowd of the dance floor, some of his control had slipped. The same reason anyone takes a job. Good opportunity, competitive salary, chance to advance my career. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Olivia met his eyes directly for the first time since the dance began, and what she saw there made her breath catch. The professional mask was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate, and heartbreakingly familiar. "You want to know if I knew?" she said quietly. If I took this position because I knew you were here. Did you? No. The honesty felt like stepping off a cliff. I researched the company, but I didn't let myself look too closely at the executive team. Maybe part of me suspected, but I didn't want to know for certain. Because if you had known, I wouldn't have taken the job. The admission hung between them like a confession. I'm not a masochist, Damien. I wouldn't put myself through this voluntarily. Something flickered across his features. Pain, relief, regret. Through what exactly? This. She gestured between them, encompassing the careful distance, the professional courtesy, the way they were dancing around each other literally and metaphorically. Pretending we're strangers, acting like we don't have a history, working together as if the past never happened. Maybe that's for the best. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like we're both slowly suffocating. The song ended, but neither of them stepped apart. They stood in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by other couples and yet completely isolated in their bubble of shared history and unresolved emotion. We can't do this here, Damien said finally, his voice rough with something that might have been regret. Then where? When? Because I'm tired of pretending, Damien. I'm tired of walking on eggshells around you. Tired of acting like my heart doesn't stop every time you walk into a room. Don't. The word came out sharper than he'd probably intended, and several nearby couples glanced their way. Damien immediately stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. This isn't the time or place for this conversation. When is? Because so far you've been treating me like I have a communicable disease. I've been treating you like a valued employee. You've been treating me like someone you wish you could erase from existence. The accusation hit its mark. Damien's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Olivia thought he might actually respond with honesty. Instead, he glanced around at the other dancers, clearly remembering where they were. We should return to the reception, he said stiffly. People will notice if we're gone too long. But as he started to turn away, Olivia caught his arm. The contact sent electricity through both of them, and Damien froze like he'd been struck by lightning. The letter, she said urgently. The one you left in my office. What did you want to say? Damien looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up to her face. For a moment, his expression was completely unguarded, and Olivia saw 8 years of pain and longing and desperate hope. I wanted to explain, he said quietly. I wanted to tell you why I can't what? Can't look at you without remembering everything I lost. The words hit her like a physical blow. Before she could respond, Marcus appeared at her elbow, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp with understanding. Sorry to interrupt, he said smoothly. But Mrs. Hendricks from the scholarship committee wanted to meet you, Olivia. She's heard wonderful things about your marketing background. The interruption broke the spell. Damien stepped back, his professional composure sliding back into place like armor. Of course, he said formally. Ms. Parker, thank you for the dance. I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. He walked away without looking back, leaving Olivia standing in the middle of the dance floor with Marcus, and a heart that felt like it had been broken all over again. Are you all right? Marcus asked gently. I will be, Olivia said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Let's go meet Mrs. Hendricks. But as Marcus guided her through the crowd, Olivia couldn't stop thinking about the raw pain in Damien's voice when he'd said he couldn't look at her without remembering everything he'd lost. Because the truth was, she couldn't look at him either. Not without remembering the boy who had loved her completely, who had promised her forever, who had disappeared from her life without explanation or second chances. Later that night, as Olivia stood in her apartment still wearing her gala dress, she found an envelope that had been slipped under her door. Inside was a key, old-fashioned, ornate, the kind that might unlock something precious, and a note in Damien's handwriting. Our old coffee shop is now a bookstore. Second floor, corner table by the window. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. There are things you need to know. Olivia stared at the key, remembering the countless hours they'd spent at that corner table, dreaming of their future together. If love could thaw ice, was his heart ready to melt? The bookstore occupied the same space where their college coffee shop had once thrived, but everything else had changed. Where once there had been mismatched furniture and the constant hum of espresso machines, now there were neat rows of bookshelves and reading nooks bathed in warm lamplight. The second floor, however, remained largely unchanged. The same exposed brick walls, the same large windows overlooking the street, even the same corner table where Olivia and Damien had spent countless hours studying and dreaming together. Olivia climbed the narrow staircase at exactly 7 o'clock, her heart hammering against her ribs with each step. The key from his note had unlocked the bookstore's front door, which meant Damien had arranged for privacy. Whatever conversation awaited her, it would happen without witnesses or interruptions. She found him standing by the window where their old table used to be, still dressed in his business suit, but with his tie loosened and his usual armor of perfect composure slightly askew. He looked younger somehow, more like the Danny she had known in college, and the sight of him made her chest tighten with emotions she'd spent 8 years trying to forget. "Thank you for coming," he said without turning around. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't." Olivia remained near the stairs, maintaining distance even as every instinct urged her to move closer. "This feels too much like walking backward into the past. Maybe that's what we need to do. Maybe we need to go back to understand how we ended up here." Damien finally turned to face her, and Olivia was shocked by what she saw in his expression. The professional mask was completely gone, replaced by a vulnerability so raw it made her ache to comfort him. "I found something," he continued, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Something that's been sitting in my desk drawer for 8 years, waiting for me to be brave enough to confront what it means." He pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age and worn soft around the edges as if it had been handled countless times. Olivia's breath caught as she recognized her own handwriting across the front, addressing it to him at Harvard Business School. "You found my letter. I found your letter." Damien's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the emotion underneath. "The one you sent 3 weeks after graduation. The one that somehow got mixed up with my acceptance paperwork and buried in the dean's office until an administrative cleaning last month brought it to light." Olivia sank into a nearby chair, the implications hitting her like a tidal wave. "You never got it. I never got it." He moved closer, still holding the letter like it might dissolve if he gripped it too tightly. "For 8 years, I believed you had betrayed me. I believed you had chosen someone else, had been lying to me about your feelings, had made a fool of me in front of everyone we knew." The pain in his voice was unbearable. Olivia closed her eyes, remembering the letter she had poured her heart into, the words she had crafted so carefully to explain everything. "What did you think happened?" she whispered. "Ryan Morrison told me he'd seen you with someone else. He had photos, details, a whole story about how you'd been secretly seeing this other guy throughout our senior year." Damien's jaw tightened with remembered anger. "He said you felt sorry for me, that you'd been planning to break up with me after graduation, but didn't have the heart to do it before I left for Harvard." "And you believed him?" "He had evidence, Olivia. Photos of you having dinner with this man, laughing with him, looking—" Damien struggled with the words. "Looking the way you used to look at me." Understanding crashed over her like ice water. "My father." "What?" "The man in the photos was my father." Olivia opened her eyes, meeting Damien's shocked gaze. "He was visiting for graduation week, remember? I took him to dinner several times, showed him around campus. We were trying to repair our relationship after his divorce, and I was so happy that he was finally making an effort to be part of my life again." Damien went very still. "Your father?" "My father, who you never got to meet because he canceled his plans to attend our graduation at the last minute. My father, who I talked about constantly but who Ryan had never seen before." Olivia felt tears burning behind her eyes. Ryan saw what he wanted to see, and you believed what he wanted you to believe. But why would Ryan lie about something like that? Because he was in love with me, and I had turned him down repeatedly. Because he thought if he could break us up, he might have a chance. Olivia stood up, pacing to the window where they had once sat planning their future together. "I explained all of this in the letter, Damien. I explained about my father, about Ryan's lies, about how much I loved you, and how much I was looking forward to our future together. Jesus. Damien sank into a chair, the letter still clutched in his hands. I destroyed everything based on a lie. We both destroyed everything, Olivia corrected gently. I could have tried harder to reach you when you stopped returning my calls. I could have shown up at Harvard, demanded an explanation instead of just giving up. You tried to call. For 3 months, I called every day. I left messages, sent emails, even tried reaching out through mutual friends. The memory of those desperate attempts to contact him still stung, but you had made it clear you wanted nothing to do with me, and I was too proud to keep chasing someone who obviously didn't want to be caught. Damien looked up at her with eyes full of regret and something that might have been hope. What did the letter say? Olivia smiled sadly. Read it. With trembling hands, Damien opened the envelope and unfolded the pages inside. Olivia watched his face as he read, saw the moment when understanding dawned, when regret gave way to something deeper and more painful. You were going to transfer to Harvard, he whispered, his voice breaking. You had been accepted to their graduate program. You were going to surprise me, to follow me there so we could build our future together. I had it all planned out. I was going to show up at your dorm room with acceptance letter in hand, ready to prove that distance didn't have to come between us. Olivia's voice was thick with old grief. I had given up my internship in Chicago, turned down other opportunities, arranged my entire life around being with you. But I never got the letter. I never knew. Damien's hands shook as he continued reading. You waited for me to call. You thought I had gotten cold feet about our relationship, that I was avoiding you because I didn't want the burden of a long-distance relationship, while you thought I had betrayed you with someone else. Olivia sat down across from him, the weight of their mutual misunderstanding settling between them like a stone. We were both so hurt, so proud, so convinced the other person had stopped caring. 8 years, Damien said, looking up from the letter with devastation written across his features. 8 years I've spent believing you chose someone else over me. 8 years of building walls around my heart, convinced that love was just another business transaction that could be terminated at will. 8 years I've spent wondering what I did wrong, why the man who promised me forever disappeared without explanation. Olivia felt tears threatening again. 8 years of second-guessing every relationship, wondering if I was capable of inspiring real love or if what we had was just youthful fantasy. Damien carefully folded the letter and placed it on the table between them. I built an empire on the foundation of that betrayal. Every ruthless decision, every cold calculation, every wall I put up between myself and the world, it all came from the belief that you had played me for a fool. And I've spent 8 years being afraid to trust completely, convinced that love was something that could vanish without warning or explanation. They sat in silence for several long moments, the weight of their shared tragedy settling around them like dust from a collapsed building. Finally, Damien spoke. I don't know how to undo 8 years of damage, Olivia. I don't know how to tear down walls I've spent so long building. I don't know either, she admitted. But maybe that's not the right question. Maybe the question is whether we want to try. Damien stood up abruptly, pacing to the window where they had once sat planning their future together. There's something else, he said, his voice tight with emotion. Something I need to tell you before you decide if trying is worth the risk. What? He turned to face her, and Olivia saw something that looked like fear in his eyes. Ryan Morrison is now my business partner. He owns 30% of Blackwell Industries, and he's the one who recommended you for this position. The revelation hit Olivia like a physical blow. He knew, she whispered. He knew exactly who I was when he recommended me. He knew. Damien's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger. He's been my business partner for 3 years, ever since his investment firm helped fund our expansion into European markets. Last month, he suggested we needed fresh talent in our marketing department, someone with experience in both corporate and nonprofit sectors. And he just happened to recommend me? He said he'd heard about your work in Chicago, that you'd be perfect for the position. I trusted his judgment. He's never steered me wrong on business matters. Damien's voice was bitter with self-recrimination. I should have known he was playing a longer game. But why? Why would he want to bring us back together after all this time? I don't think he wanted to bring us together. I think he wanted to watch us destroy each other. Damien began pacing again, his controlled facade cracking under the weight of his emotions. Think about it, Olivia. He spent 8 years watching me build walls, become colder, more ruthless. He's seen how the belief in your betrayal has shaped every decision I've made. And now he gets to watch the truth tear you apart. Or watch me tear you apart. Either way, he wins. Damien stopped pacing and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. But there's something he didn't count on. What? He didn't count on me falling in love with you all over again. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they dared to cross. Olivia felt her heart hammering against her ribs, 8 years of carefully constructed defenses crumbling in the face of his honesty. But before she could respond, Damien's phone buzzed with a text message. His expression darkened as he read it, and he showed her the screen. The message was from Ryan Morrison. Enjoying your reunion? Tomorrow's board meeting should be interesting. By the way, you might want to check the morning news. Damien and Olivia looked at each other with growing dread, realizing that Ryan's game was far from over. But could forgiveness bloom after years of winter? The morning news was worse than either of them had imagined. Olivia watched in horror from her apartment as the business reporter delivered what felt like a death sentence to everything Damien had worked to build. In a shocking revelation, sources close to Blackwell Industries claim that CEO Damien Blackwell has been engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate employee, Senior Marketing Director Olivia Parker. The allegations suggest that Parker was hired not based on merit, but on her personal relationship with Blackwell, raising serious questions about corporate governance and potential securities fraud. Olivia's phone had been ringing since 6 a.m., reporters, colleagues, even Emma calling from Chicago after seeing the story pick up national coverage. She'd turned off the ringer and let them all go to voicemail. But the damage was already spreading like wildfire across social media and financial news sites. Her doorbell rang at 8 o'clock sharp, and she opened it to find Damien standing there with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that somehow managed to combine fury and determination in equal measure. "I suppose you've seen the news," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Ryan's opening move. Damien handed her one of the coffees, his jaw tight with controlled anger. "He's trying to frame our relationship as corporate misconduct, destroy both our reputations before we can expose what he did. Is it working?" The stock price dropped 12% in pre-market trading. The board is in full panic mode. I've got 3 different law firms calling about potential litigation, and my assistant has fielded 47 interview requests since 7 a.m. Olivia sank onto her couch, overwhelmed by the scope of the destruction. This is exactly what he wanted, isn't it? To watch us burn. Maybe. Or maybe he's just given me the perfect opportunity to call his bluff. Damien sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body despite the cool morning air. "I've moved the board meeting to this afternoon, and I've invited the press." "You've what?" "I'm going public, Olivia. Full transparency about our history, about Ryan's role in keeping us apart, about everything." Damien's eyes were blazing with the kind of focused intensity that had probably intimidated countless boardrooms. "But I need you to know that this could get ugly. Ryan won't go down without a fight, and he's had years to prepare for this moment. What exactly are you planning to say?" "The truth, all of it. About college, about the lies, about the letter I never received, about how Ryan Morrison manipulated both our lives for his own twisted satisfaction." Damien reached for her hands, his touch anchoring her in the storm of chaos swirling around them. "And I'm going to tell them that despite everything he put us through, despite 8 years of separation and pain, I'm still in love with you." Olivia's breath caught. "In front of the entire board? In front of the press? In front of anyone who wants to listen? Because I'm done hiding, Olivia. I'm done letting fear and pride and other people's manipulations dictate my life." His voice was steady, certain, completely without doubt. "I'm done pretending that anything I've built matters more than being with you. Damien, think about what you're risking. Your company, your reputation, are meaningless without you." He interrupted her protest with fierce certainty. I spent 8 years building an empire on the foundation of believing you'd betrayed me. Every cold decision, every ruthless move, every wall I put up, it was all because I thought love was just another transaction that could be terminated at will. And now? Now I know that love is the only thing that can't be bought, sold, or manipulated. It's the only thing that's actually worth fighting for. Damien's thumb traced over her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her eyes fill with tears. I'm going to make Ryan an offer he can't refuse. What kind of offer? I'm going to give him a choice. He can sell me his 30% stake in the company for fair market value and disappear from our lives forever. Or I can expose every unethical business practice he's engaged in over the past 3 years and let the SEC sort it out. Olivia stared at him. You have evidence of unethical practices? I have evidence of everything. Insider trading, market manipulation, conflicts of interest that would make his head spin. Damien's smile was sharp and completely without mercy. You don't become as successful as I am without learning to protect yourself from partners who might not have your best interests at heart. So this whole thing, the press conference, the public declaration, it's all a setup? It's all truth, Olivia. Every word I plan to say about loving you, about wanting to build a life with you, about refusing to let anyone else dictate our future. That's all completely genuine. Damien lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. The tactical maneuvering is just how I'm going to make sure we get the chance to try. The press conference was scheduled for 2 o'clock, held in Blackwell Industries' main conference room, with every major financial news outlet in attendance. Olivia watched from the back of the room as Damien stood behind the podium, looking calm and controlled despite the chaos of the morning's revelations. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying easily across the packed room. I've called this conference to address the allegations made about myself and Ms. Olivia Parker, as well as to make an important announcement about the future of Blackwell Industries. The room was absolutely silent, every reporter leaning forward in anticipation. 8 years ago, I made a mistake that cost me the most important thing in my life. I believed a lie told by someone I trusted, and I allowed pride and hurt to keep me from fighting for the woman I loved. Damien's eyes found Olivia's across the crowded room. Today, I'm here to correct that mistake, and to make it clear that I will not allow anyone to manipulate or threaten the people I care about. He paused, his gaze never leaving Olivia's face, and she realized this was the moment everything would change forever. Therefore, he continued, his voice steady and sure, I am formally announcing my intention to acquire Morrison Investment Group's 30% stake in Blackwell Industries, effective immediately. And I am asking Olivia Parker, the woman I never stopped loving, to become not just my partner in business, but my partner in life. The room erupted in chaos, cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions, but all Olivia could see was Damien's outstretched hand and the hope in his eyes. As she made her way through the crowd toward him, she realized that this wasn't just about choosing love over fear. It was about choosing to fight for something that had been worth fighting for 8 years ago, and was still worth fighting for now. What if redemption required risking everything he had built? The chaos in the conference room was deafening. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, board members looking stunned by the sudden turn of events. But Olivia barely heard any of it. Her entire world had narrowed to the man standing at the podium, his hand extended toward her, his heart laid bare for everyone to see. Miss Parker, Damien said, his voice carrying over the din with the authority of a man who had built an empire from nothing. Will you join me? The walk to the front of the room felt like crossing an ocean. Every step carried the weight of 8 years of separation, of hurt and misunderstanding, and walls they had built around their hearts. Every eye in the room was on her, but all Olivia could see was Damien, the boy who had once promised her forever, the man who was offering her everything he had built. When she reached the podium, he took her hand with infinite gentleness, and suddenly the chaos around them seemed to fade into background noise. I have something to say, Olivia said, her voice quiet but clear enough to carry through the room. The reporters immediately fell silent, sensing a story even bigger than they had anticipated. 8 years ago, she continued, her eyes never leaving Damien's face, I lost the love of my life to lies and manipulation. I spent years wondering what I had done wrong, why the man who promised me forever had disappeared without explanation. Today I learned the truth, that we were both victims of someone else's cruelty, someone who was willing to destroy 2 lives for his own satisfaction. She turned to address the room, but kept Damien's hand firmly in hers. Ryan Morrison deliberately sabotaged our relationship in college by convincing Damien that I had betrayed him. He kept us apart for 8 years, and then he engineered my hiring at this company not to reunite us, but to watch us destroy each other. A murmur ran through the room, reporters frantically taking notes as the real story began to unfold. But here's what Mr. Morrison didn't understand about love, Olivia continued, her voice growing stronger. Real love doesn't disappear just because someone tries to destroy it. It doesn't fade because of distance or time or even betrayal. Real love endures, and it fights back. She looked at Damien again, seeing the hope and vulnerability and desperate love in his eyes. Damien Blackwell is offering me partnership in his company, but more importantly, he's offering me partnership in his life. He's willing to risk everything he's built for the chance to build something better together. The room was absolutely silent now, everyone hanging on her next words. And my answer is... Olivia paused, feeling the weight of the moment, the magnitude of the choice she was making. Yes, the room erupted again, but this time it was different. Instead of chaos, there was something that felt almost like celebration. Cameras flashed as Damien pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest, while questions flew around them like confetti. "Mr. Blackwell," shouted a reporter from the Financial Times. "What about Morrison Investment Group? Are you really prepared to buy out your partner?" Damien's smile was sharp and completely without compromise. "Mr. Morrison will be receiving an offer within the hour. Fair market value for his shares, with a confidentiality agreement that ensures he never again interferes in the lives of anyone associated with this company. And if he refuses, then the SEC will be receiving a comprehensive file documenting his various violations of securities law over the past 3 years. I suspect they'll find it very interesting reading." Another reporter jumped in. "Ms. Parker, are you concerned about the ethics of entering both a personal and professional relationship with your CEO?" Olivia felt Damien tense beside her, but she answered with calm confidence. "I'm concerned about building something genuine and lasting with a man I've loved for over a decade. As for the professional relationship, I'll be taking a leave of absence from Blackwell Industries while we explore other opportunities." "What kind of opportunities?" Damien's arm tightened around her waist. "We're discussing the possibility of Ms. Parker heading up the newly established Blackwell Foundation, focused on educational opportunities for first-generation college students. It would be an independent position with its own board of directors and funding structure." It was the first Olivia had heard of this plan, but looking into his eyes, she could see that he'd been thinking about it, planning ways to give them both a chance at happiness without compromising either of their professional ethics. The questions continued for another 20 minutes. But eventually the reporters began to file out, already rushing to meet deadlines with the story of the decade. When the room finally emptied except for a few board members huddled in worried conversation, Damien turned to Olivia with an expression she'd never seen before. Complete and utter peace. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Because once we walk out of here together, there's no going back. Your life is going to change in ways you can't imagine." "My life already changed the day I walked into your office," Olivia replied. "The only question was whether I was brave enough to fight for what I wanted. And are you?" "I'm here, aren't I?" Damien's smile could have powered the entire city. "Yes, you are. And I promise you, Olivia Parker, that I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking this chance on us." "What about your empire? Are you really willing to risk it all for us?" "The empire was never the point," Damien said, his voice soft with certainty. "The point was proving to myself that I was worth something, that I could build something lasting and meaningful. But what I've learned today is that the only thing lasting and meaningful is love. Everything else is just expensive decoration." As they walked out of the conference room hand in hand, past the board members and the lingering reporters and the chaos they had created together, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 years, complete and utter certainty about her future. But they were almost to the elevator when Jennifer approached them with an envelope that would change everything once more. Would she accept the company? And his heart? Jennifer approached them with an expression of barely contained excitement, holding an envelope with trembling hands. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, "this just arrived by courier. It's from Morrison Investment Group." Damien opened the envelope, read the contents, and his face transformed with something that looked like vindication mixed with relief. "He's accepting the buyout offer," he said quietly. "Full terms, no negotiations, with one condition. He wants to meet with both of us tomorrow morning to personally apologize." Olivia stared at him in shock. "Ryan Morrison wants to apologize?" "Apparently facing financial ruin and potential criminal charges has a way of clarifying one's priorities," Damien said, his voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. The offer included documentation of his securities violations. His lawyers must have advised him that cooperation was his best option. As they rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Olivia found herself grappling with the surreal turn their lives had taken in the span of a single day. This morning, she'd been a marketing director trying to navigate an impossible workplace situation. Tonight, she was the woman who had publicly chosen love over safety, scandal over security. "Having second thoughts?" Damien asked, reading her expression with the intuitive understanding that had always existed between them. "No," Olivia said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I'm just trying to process how quickly everything changed. This morning I was convinced our story was over. Tonight, it feels like it's just beginning." "It is just beginning," Damien said, reaching for her hand as they stepped out into the cool Manhattan evening. 8 years ago, we were kids playing at forever. Now we're adults who've learned what it costs to lose something precious. They walked through the city streets in comfortable silence, both of them lost in thought about the magnitude of the choice they'd made. The financial district was quieting down for the evening, but Olivia could see their story playing out on news screens and restaurant windows and feel the weight of public attention that would follow them now. "Are you prepared for what comes next?" she asked as they reached her apartment building. "The media attention, the scrutiny, the questions about our relationship?" "I'm prepared for anything as long as we face it together," Damien replied. "But there is one thing I need to know." "What?" "When you said yes in that conference room, were you saying yes to the foundation position, or were you saying yes to us?" Olivia turned to face him fully, seeing the vulnerability he was trying to hide behind his confident facade. Even after everything, the public declaration, the press conference, the dramatic gesture, he was still afraid that she might choose the safe path over the uncertain one. "I was saying yes to building a life with you," she said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "The foundation is wonderful, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, but I would have said yes even if you'd been offering me nothing but your heart. Even though that heart comes with a lot of complications, especially because of the complications. Easy love isn't real love, Damien. Real love is choosing each other despite the obstacles. Not because there aren't any." Damien closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man finding shelter after a long journey through winter. "I love you, Olivia Parker. Not because you're convenient or safe or what I thought I wanted, but because you're you. Because you challenge me to be better. Because you see through all my carefully constructed defenses. Because you make me want to tear down every wall I've built if it means having you in my life." "I love you too," Olivia whispered. "The boy you were, the man you've become, and whoever you're still becoming. I love your ambition and your vulnerability, your strength and your tenderness, your ability to build empires, and your willingness to risk everything for love. So what happens now?" "Now we take it one day at a time," Olivia said, echoing the words she'd spoken in the bookstore that had started this journey. "We deal with Ryan tomorrow. We figure out the foundation. We navigate the media attention, and we learn how to be together again. And if it gets difficult, then we remember this moment. We remember that we chose each other freely, honestly, with full knowledge of what we were risking." Olivia smiled up at him, her heart full of certainty about their future. "We remember that some things are worth fighting for, even if the fight isn't easy. Damien kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise, right there on the sidewalk under the glow of the street lamps. It was their first real kiss in 8 years, and it tasted like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. "I have one more confession to make," Damien said, his eyes twinkling with mischief that reminded her of the boy she'd fallen in love with in college. "What now?" "The bookstore where we met last night, I own it. I bought it 3 years ago when I heard it was going out of business because I couldn't bear the thought of losing the place where we'd been happiest together." Olivia stared at him in amazement. "You've owned our coffee shop for 3 years?" "I've been keeping it exactly as it was, hoping that someday—" He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed by the romantic gesture. "Hoping that someday we'd have reason to go back there together." "You impossible romantic," Olivia said, laughing through the tears that had started flowing. "All this time you've been preserving our past while I was trying to forget it." "I couldn't forget it. I tried, God knows I tried. But every important decision I made was measured against the memory of loving you." As they stood together on the sidewalk, wrapped in the certainty of their choice and the promise of their future, Olivia realized that tomorrow would bring challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in 8 years, she wasn't afraid of what the future might hold. What mattered more, his fortune or their second chance? The meeting with Ryan Morrison took place in a neutral location, the elegant conference room of a law firm that specialized in corporate transactions. Olivia sat beside Damien at the polished mahogany table, her heart hammering with nervous energy as they waited for the man who had manipulated their lives to arrive. When Ryan walked through the door, Olivia was struck by how much he had changed. The confident, manipulative man she remembered from college had been replaced by someone who looked genuinely remorseful, his shoulders hunched with the weight of his actions. Damien. Olivia. He nodded to each of them, taking a seat across the table with the careful movements of someone who understood he was not welcome. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "You have 5 minutes," Damien said coldly. "My lawyers have the buyout papers ready for signature, and after that, I never want to see you again." Ryan nodded, accepting the harsh terms without protest. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I needed to tell you both, face to face, how sorry I am for what I've done to your lives." "Sorry?" Olivia found her voice, 8 years of pain and confusion crystallizing into anger. "You destroyed our relationship based on lies. You kept us apart for 8 years. You tried to manipulate us again by bringing me to work for Damien. And now you're sorry?" "I was in love with you," Ryan said quietly, his eyes fixed on the table. "In college, I was so in love with you that I couldn't see straight. When you chose Damien over me, when you kept choosing him despite every hint I dropped about how you deserved better, I lost perspective. So you decided to destroy our happiness? I convinced myself that I was saving you from making a mistake. Damien was so driven, so focused on his goals. I thought he would eventually break your heart anyway, choose his ambitions over your relationship." Ryan finally looked up, meeting Olivia's eyes with genuine remorse. "I told myself I was protecting you. By lying to both of us? By lying to myself first. I created this elaborate justification for my actions, convinced myself that if I could just separate you two, you would eventually see that I was the better choice." Ryan's voice was heavy with self-disgust. "But years passed and you didn't choose me. You didn't choose anyone. And I realized that I hadn't saved you from heartbreak. I had caused it." Damien leaned forward, his voice deadly quiet. "So why bring her to my company now? Why not just let sleeping dogs lie? Because I've watched you for 3 years, Damien. I've seen what that betrayal did to you, how it shaped you into someone cold and calculating and alone. And I realized that I had destroyed 2 lives instead of saving 1. Ryan pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. "This contains every document related to our business partnership, every contract, every agreement. I'm dissolving our relationship completely and transferring all my shares to you at below market value. Why? Because I want you to have the chance I took away from you 8 years ago. I want you both to have the chance to build something real together." Ryan stood up, his movements careful and deliberate. I'm leaving the country, moving to London to start over with a clean slate. You'll never have to see me again." Olivia stared at him, trying to reconcile this broken, remorseful man with the confident manipulator who had destroyed her happiness. "Do you really think an apology erases 8 years of pain?" "No," Ryan said simply. "I think an apology is the first step toward making amends. The rest is up to me to figure out how to live with what I've done." After he left, Olivia and Damien sat in silence for several long minutes, processing the encounter and everything it meant for their future. "How do you feel?" Damien asked finally. "Free," Olivia said, surprised by the truth of it. "For the first time in 8 years, I feel completely free to choose my own path forward." "And what path is that?" Olivia turned to face him fully, taking in the man he had become. Successful, powerful, but underneath it all, still the person who had won her heart in a college coffee shop with terrible jokes and ambitious dreams. "I want to build something with you," she said. "Not because we're trying to recapture the past, not because we feel obligated by history, but because I genuinely want to see what we can create together as the people we are now. Even though I'm not the same person you fell in love with in college, you're better," Olivia said, reaching for his hand. "You're stronger, more thoughtful, more careful with people's hearts. You've learned how much damage careless words and assumptions can cause, and you've learned the value of fighting for what matters. And you're more confident, more independent, more sure of your own worth." Damien lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I fell in love with a girl who needed me to complete her. I'm in love with a woman who chooses to share her complete life with me. So what happens now? Now we take it one day at a time. We build trust. We learn each other's new rhythms. We figure out how to blend our lives without losing ourselves." Damien's smile was warm and genuine, and completely without the careful calculation she'd seen in the corporate world. "And we stop letting other people's choices define our happiness." 6 months later, Olivia stood in the same bookstore where Damien had given her the letter that changed everything. But this time the space was filled with laughter and celebration. The Blackwell Foundation had officially launched with Olivia as its executive director, and they were celebrating their first successful scholarship program with the people who had supported them through the transition. Emma had flown in from Chicago. Jennifer had closed the office early to attend. Even Mrs. Hendricks from the Children's Hospital had come to show her support. But the person Olivia was most grateful to see was the elderly bookstore owner who had given them the space for their first real conversation in 8 years. "You know," Damien said, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne, "I used to think success was measured in profit margins and market share. And now? Now I think it's measured in moments like this. People coming together to celebrate something meaningful, building something that will outlast quarterly reports and stock prices." He handed her the champagne, his eyes warm with contentment. "Building something with the person you love." "Speaking of building things," Olivia said, pulling a small wrapped box from her purse, "I have something for you." Damien opened the box to find a vintage fountain pen, elegant and substantial and clearly well-loved. "Olivia, this is beautiful, but it was my grandfather's. He used it to write love letters to my grandmother during World War II, letters that kept their relationship alive through 3 years of separation." Olivia's eyes filled with happy tears. "I want you to have it because I want you to know that real love endures. It survives distance and time and even deliberate sabotage. And what am I supposed to write with it?" "Whatever you want. Business contracts, foundation proposals, grocery lists." Olivia smiled up at him, her heart full of certainty about their future. "Love letters, if the mood strikes you." Damien pulled her into his arms right there in the middle of their celebration, holding her close while their friends and colleagues toasted around them. "I love you, Olivia Parker. Not because of who you used to be, not despite who you've become, but exactly because of who you are right now. I love you too, Damien Blackwell, the ambitious boy, the successful man, and everyone you might become in the future." As they held each other in the warm glow of the bookstore lights, surrounded by people who cared about them and the work they were building together, Olivia thought about the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. 8 years of separation, weeks of careful professional distance, one explosive revelation that changed everything. But mostly, she thought about the future, the foundation they would build together, the lives they would touch, the love they would nurture through whatever challenges lay ahead. The world had called him cold, had seen only the ice he'd built around his heart for protection. But in her arms, Damien burned brighter than ever, not with the desperate fire of youth, but with the steady warmth of a love that had endured everything and emerged stronger. And as Olivia looked into his eyes, she saw not the frozen empire builder the world knew, but the man who had thawed completely in the presence of a love worth waiting for.